Welcome to the First Mentor podcast. Here, you will hear us talk about a variety of topics for the entire family that will hopefully spark a discussion, create a new curiosity, or simply teach you something new. The goal is to inspire you to learn life skills and soft skills not taught in school and prepare you to live an extraordinary life. Come on and spend some time with us on your commute to school or anytime you're free.
Hello, mentees and family of mentees. We are so excited to have you join us for episode 26 of the First Mentor podcast. And this is your host and mentor, Vanessa Yang. And today we'll be talking about a topic that I definitely need to learn more about, and that is how to prepare for college entrance with our guest, Gina Lee. Now, we won't be covering the step-by-step or mechanical college admission requirements, but instead, we'll speak more about the holistic approach to college preparations. And this is an excellent episode to listen together as a family. And just remember to subscribe and share with your friends and family members who might benefit from our conversations. And let's get started right away. And I would like to welcome a guest to our show today. Hi, Gina. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Vanessa. So nice to be with you.
I am so excited to speak with you because this is a topic it's been on my mind to learn about for a few years. But I know I still have a little bit time, but I figure it's never too early to plan, right? And I know you from our children went to the same school at least some point long time ago. But what I've heard, and I was so excited when we reconnected, is your subject matter expertise when it comes to college planning. But not just that, also, I love how you help mentor the students that come to you and share a little bit more information instead of just the hard facts. These are what the things you need to do about college, right? And I would love to catch up our listeners about your background. So could you share a little bit more about that?
Sure. A good way to start is I am one of those quintessential immigrant families with a child that really didn't have any guidance in the college admissions process.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit different because my dad ended up coming to the United States to study, but he really came without much background. So when it was time for my brother and I to go to school, I had nothing. I think that's similar to we are similar stories. And so that was a pivotal memory in my mind. Fast forward that I ended up going to the University of Michigan, and I was not planning to go to college admissions in that industry at all. My goal was to be this Asian American young corporate woman who would break the glass ceiling or bamboo ceiling, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to New York and I was in the advertising industry and was an account executive there, branding and working with Procter & Gamble, working with Citibank, working with Pirelli Tires, Grilling Cosmetic, you name it. I did a lot of it. And then I went abroad and then I worked in that industry abroad in Seoul, Korea for a while, and then came back and kept on going until I had my first child. And because of some minor health issues, I had to really take time off. And then I never went back. So I had my child, came out to California, had 2 more children. And in the midst of that, I became completely a stay-at-home mom with the goal of grooming my children, growing my children, challenging my children to become very much engaged and also give back to the community. You know, I think when you're a first generation immigrant, you want to make it in some ways. That means personal, financial, and that's true. But in my time at the University of Michigan, I was pretty much involved in all campus activities. So I was president of KSA. I was in some Women's Honorary Society. I was very politically involved there. And so I did not want my children to have education or impact just for themselves. It was not about the American dream in my mind. It was about making big inroads as a second generation, or they consider themselves third generation, actually.
Yeah.
So that was sort of my goal. If I ever had children, that I was wanted to provide any kind of expertise, experiences that my husband and I both had. And so that's sort of what happened. Was I dove really deeply into providing this opportunity for my children. And then eventually what happened was I became more involved in the community at a private school in the Los Angeles area. And
Okay.
parents became friends and said, hey, can you read my son's essays? Or my daughter's essays. And I'm like, sure, absolutely. And as I read them and I edited them, they would get into the top schools. They got into Columbia,
Amazing.
Cornell, all these schools. And I thought that was really interesting. And the fact that I had this marketing background, I was
Yeah.
branding services and branding products. And I don't want to equate the two together, but a lot of it's personal branding. And so that's what I found was the elements that made people sticky,
Yeah.
products sticky, industry
Yes.
sticky, was very transferable and making people sticky. So that's kind of a big mental note that I had. And then when my oldest became more involved and
Mm-hmm.
was going to the college counseling process, I dove deep into that completely. I learned a lot. I wasn't even at that point, I was going to be a college counselor. And then I had a student and a parent come to me and say, I really would like you to mentor and I want to be your first client. And
Yes.
so then I said, no, I don't think so. I never thought of myself going into
Yeah.
education. No. And she persisted, said, no, I want you to mentor and help my daughter get through college process. However, I want you to life coach her as well.
Oh, wow.
And so that to me was a great opportunity because I didn't go into this profession just to be an educational consultant to make income. That was not my objective at all. It was about
Yes.
a child's holistic transformation. And I had been meeting and seeing and talking to a lot of parents who had typical Asian American family backgrounds where
Yeah.
their child was very quiet. Their child didn't have a voice at all. Their parents basically told them to do everything. And I thought,
Mm-hmm.
wow, this is not going to work in the United States. That's not what's
So true.
valued. If
Mm-hmm.
you can be the smartest person in the world, but if you can't articulate, if you can't advocate for yourself, you're not going to get very far. And so that sort of was my impetus in getting involved in the
Mm-hmm.
college admissions process. I went back to school. I went back to the UCLA and graduated with the college admissions certificate. And that really helped. But that was just part of my process of learning to learn about students and gain and leverage the experiences I had as a mom. And then I really started gaining more clients that way. And then at one point, I was introduced to an international prep school that had just started, connected with the founders, really bought into their vision, and they wanted to change and transform a secondary education into the 21st century. And so their goals were lofty. They wanted to be the top 5 high school in Los Angeles within a 10-year period.
Yeah.
And so I said, I'm on. I love that mission. Prior to that, I was really involved in the Mandarin immersion program, as you
Yes.
know. That's
Mm-hmm.
how our kids met. And then because of that experience working with the board and being on the parent panel and doing other kind of educational experiences and then getting to be the consultant for this school, I jumped in. Eventually, I set their college counseling department up, built co-led a leadership development institute there. And then they asked me to come on board full time. And I was hesitant at first, but I said, okay, as long as you're okay with me holding on to some of my independent students. I was
Yes.
on the missions team. I also helped market the school. I went to Korea to market it. I met with many, many different admissions people, colleges. And so it was really a jump into the startup world, basically. I decided after 2.5 years that I would leave. It was incredible because
Yes.
there was no track record. I learned a lot. The success model of that program was because we focused on their holistic
Yes. Yes.
experience,
Mm-hmm.
not just college admissions. We built a 4-year plan that began in freshman year. And so I have taken those ideas and more and
Mm-hmm.
adopted that more into my personal services and practice right now. Have a pretty thriving college admissions service education and consulting business. I take students as young as I took one 7th grader at one point.
Oh, wow.
Yes, I said I usually I go, come back to me in a couple of years. But this one personal gal was an international student. I was so impressed with her fortitude, her focus. And I really thought that I could look into doing some amazing things with her. So I did bring her
Mhm.
on. This year, I decided to switch it up a little bit because I would tell those parents, come to me a couple years later, but I have found that those parents that I tell that to eventually become my clients, or they eventually have children that are ready to go to college. And if I
Yeah.
can give some advice on not just education, but holistically their parenting, give them sort of like, it's like a tourist, right? If you want to go to Paris and you want to have such an amazing time, it's really better to go with an insider to give you
Yeah.
tips,
Yes, so
right? And
true.
to give you like some milestones and areas where you need to focus on and forget some of the myths that you hear. You might want to go, hey, don't go to the Eiffel Tower during this time of the year
Yeah.
because there's a lot of, you know,
It's
people out in
closed.
the it's closed or right, exactly. So then this year I actually started meeting with some parents. They come to me and they go, can I have an hour or two of your time? And depending on how teachable they are and how persistent they are, I've said,
Mhm.
okay, let's meet. And with a caveat, telling them that things can change.
Yes.
So this year has been a huge watershed moment for the college admissions world.
I
Um,
heard. Listening to your story and how you evolved, there's some really interesting points. One thing I wanted to point out, because I have listeners that are teens and young adults, and the question is always comes up about what do you want to be when you get older, right? And your story, just like mine, shows you don't know at a certain point where your life is going to lead you. You might study for one
yeah,
thing and you think your career is going to go direction A, but some things changed in your life, the unpredictable happens, and you go down route B or C or F or G, right? You don't know. And that's why I find it so interesting to talk to people like yourself. And that's really showing the next generation. You don't know. Prepare, enjoy it, be open-minded.
yeah, Vanessa, you bring up an excellent, excellent point. And that's one of the things I try to break, that's mindset
Yes.
that if I do X in high school, okay, that means I'm going to end up doing that exact same thing in college. And I could say, no, no, no. Please don't think that way. Don't think so linearly. Don't think in
Yes.
a box. And I tend to find that a lot of Asian parents, Asian Americans, think that way more so
Mm-hmm.
than third generation or more, people that have been around. I mean, I think generally speaking, our default position is to have this formulaic
Mm-hmm.
way of thinking. And I talk to people on even in my industry and I say, hey, don't beat up those Asian parents that think numbers, numbers, numbers. I need to get this SAT score. Let's take it 4 or 5 times. I've said this many times to people that I know in my industry. I say, think about the history of Asians. What happens in their country? It's all about that national test. It's
Yes.
all about numbers, right? You have so
Mm-hmm.
many students in China. How do you vet by numbers? In Korea, the same thing.
So
They would
true.
take this national test and it would be posted on the wall of the school. And you would look up your name and see, did I make the national test? Am I qualifying? Yes or no? And your numbers would determine your worth.
Yeah.
And so I said, that's the mentality and background that a lot of Asian families have. And so they're driven by numbers, except we know that that's not how things
It's
work in the United
not.
States,
It's
right?
not. Yes.
It's not globally, it doesn't work in the world anymore,
Yeah.
right? I try to break that framework by saying, think of it this way. If you don't believe me, think about let's go into your common sense, right? The jobs that are so lucrative and such a high demand right now wasn't even conceived 10 years ago,
So true.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? It's gonna happen again. Jobs after 5 to 10 years are going to shift dramatically. So you go into high school, college thinking one way, and it may not be that way. Now you still have traditional jobs, which is the lawyers, the doctors,
Yeah.
the nurses, the teachers. Granted, those are true, but if you want to be on the forefront and on the edge of what's happening in the world, you can't be linear thinking.
Yeah.
So I try to break that and go,
Mhm.
let's dial that back all the way back to parenting, right?
It's
Now I'm
very
going to take it all.
true.
And I tell my students and my families that you need to have different kind of mindset.
Yeah.
And here's a secret formula. If you want to take a secret formula, there really isn't, but just categories. I always tell parents, what do you value? Like, what is success in your mind?
Good
Is it in
question.
that right? And so some families go, I want my child to be happy. I want my child to pick something that they can thrive in.
Mhm.
That's one set of parents. Another set of parents will say, I want them to have security. I want them to have a job,
Yeah.
right? So in my world, that people that come to me, they're kind of they're divided in two different kind of family
Mhm.
camps.
Mhm.
Okay. So I try to work with them with their particular mindset. So I said, if you're trying to look at happiness or joy, that's great. But what does that mean to you? Like dig deep parents. So I actually have a parent survey and I ask
Great.
them, what do they value? What do they see in their kid? What do they know they're good at? What do they need to, what are the things that their child needs to work on? What I'm trying to really get to with that parent survey is to determine what do the family value
Mhm.
and how observant are they with their child? Because that is a key to, I think, one of the keys to successful parenting
Mhm.
is to really sit down and go, what would be happy? What do I want? Remember, I told you for me, happiness or success parenting was having my boys, I have 3 boys, succeed by making impact in the world. It's
That's
not
right.
driven by financials for me. So that meant I would put a lot of emphasis on education. So I went a certain direction. I went to the prep school route for my first two.
Okay.
And then with my last one, I decided to do something very, very different, but similar. So we did the main immersion program, but the idea was similar. That was my goal. And so with that goal, I said, it's not just about your skills, right? As
Yeah.
parents, it's really easy to say, what's their GPA? What's their SAT score? What level of certificate of merit are they on their violin? We want
Mhm.
these numbers to define who they are.
So
But
true.
that's such a slow and short-sighted way to look at things because do we want our children to peak at elementary school? No, we want
Right?
them to peak what? We want them to peak probably not for a long time. One of the peak points is maybe 11th grade. Another peak point is when they're like graduating from college. Hopefully they'll
Yes.
know, right? And another peak point is probably in their 20s. So a lot of what I hear, and I try to keep my mouth shut, and I'll hear things like, "My kid can read at like 3 years old or 4 years old," and I'm thinking, okay, great. It's easy for us to get enthusiastic that our child and we want to be there and be like really happy about it. But I always go, don't quite look at the accolades really early on. You don't
Mhm.
want them to peak, right? Like study your children. So for me, it's about I want impact. How do you get impact? Well, there's some basics you have to have,
Yes.
which is skills. If you don't love reading, or you can't do some arithmetic,
Yeah.
then you're not going to succeed. So there's some academic skill sets,
Yes.
right? Some kids are really good at school.
Mhm.
Other kids will go, I'm not going to do it until you tell me why I need to do it. Right? There's different
Yes,
personality.
so true.
Other kids are like, okay, what's next? Like tell me. They're very timid and they are very cautious and so I always go, know your child. Like, don't compare your child to someone else. Good for your other friend that can read that Harry Potter book at the age of 5, but your child is your child. What are the things that motivate your child? What are the things that make them fearful? Their personalities, are they introverted, extroverted,
Yeah.
right? What are
Yeah.
they into? What do they naturally love or curious about? Right? All those things you really need to understand to
Mhm.
kind of grapple with what's the trajectory of road as a parent. And this is my philosophy of giving them experiences that they're going to enjoy. Because one of the things that all these schools are looking for, even if you go to, I'm just going to go to community college, or I aspire to go to the big Ivy schools of the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
The same thing that is from one end of the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum is intellectual curiosity,
Yes, love that.
right?
Yeah.
Intellectual vitality. So what does that mean? That does not mean getting straight A's.
Nope.
Getting straight A's means you're a good academic student. You
Yes.
know how to play school.
So true.
Okay, you know the game of school. There's value to that. However, what really will drive everything is what is that kid really into? And are you providing opportunities for that child to jump on that and grow from that?
Yes. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. So if I'm taking it down to a 3 or 4 year old or 5 year old, some kids love reading books.
Mm-hmm. True.
They just gobble it up, right? Some kids love to tinker with their hands and build and do things like that. Like they love Legos and even playing Legos. I'll go, how does your kid play Legos? Or I'll talk to my students because I do a
Mm-hmm.
lot of interviewing with my students because I want to know a lot about who they are. What do they get excited about? What are they motivated by? What do they love to be? Who do they love to be around?
That's
So
great.
I'll say, what did you love to play with when you were little? Right. And they'll tell me Legos, for instance. And I go, okay, how did you play with your Legos? What's the first thing you did? I'm going to assume you get a box of Legos. And you know how Legos has directions, but it's all pictorial.
Yes. Yes.
So I'll say, what do you do first? I look at the box, like look at the box, look at like what it is. I say, okay, do you follow the directions first? Most of them say, yes, I follow the directions. And then once you follow the direction, you build it. Do you ask your mom? Do you do it yourself? What do
Mm-hmm.
you do? I do it myself. And then I go, okay, once you build it, what do you do with it? Like, where is it in your room? Are you holding it up? Are you figuring out the next piece you're going to do? You can take it apart and take your other pieces of Legos and put it in there. Or are you literally want to glue all the pieces together to like look at it? It's how you play
Yeah.
is really important to sort of where your child naturally gravitates towards. So is your child a process kid? Is your child the type of kid that really is geared towards just the end result?
Yeah.
Right? So things like that are tip-offs of like what kind of interest your child will have in the long run. So if they're really into the process, and as I learn more information, then it's like naturally geared towards engineering that direction,
Ah, okay.
right?
Okay. Good
Okay, I'm
points.
playing it out. So it's how they play, and then what they're motivated by, and then who their friends are. Are they someone who's really motivated by lots of friends, few friends? So all those things really matter. So I always tell parents, I know you're looking for the silver bullet. I know you come to me and go, Gina, give me the formula to get my kids into Ivy Leagues. And I have to
Mm-hmm.
say, my older two went to Ivy League. That does bring certain parents to me that are really interested in finding out what my formula is. But
Yeah.
I would say I knew my value. I studied them really well. They're both very different. And then we worked on habits and regimen, not because they did sports.
Yeah.
They both did, because my husband and I were both into sports
Mm-hmm.
when we were growing up. So that was really an important value to us.
Yeah.
Funny story is my second son wanted to play the violin. And I
That's
was
great.
like, but you gotta laugh because I would say, why are you playing the violin? Like, you don't need to play the violin. I don't want to go that route. There's way too many Asian kids playing the violin.
Oh, that's a good
I don't
point,
think
though.
so.
Normally it's the other way around, so that's interesting.
Yes, I just went, no. And he was persistent. He's like, I want to play the violin.
Huh,
So we
interesting.
said, okay, we will do it. So he did sports and he did the violin all the way through. He did
Yeah,
very well.
because he
But
wanted to do it.
he wanted to do it, but there were times where he didn't want to do it. I mean, we fought over the violin. I said, if you're going to do it, you're committing to it. You're not quitting. And at some point when he didn't want to practice like most kids, I would say, just stop. Please do me a favor and stop. Okay. And then he said, I can't stop because I put so much effort to it. I said, yeah, you're right. So are you going to kind of push through this difficulty? What can you do better? And so for him, I believe it was more the violin that really made him persistent and gritty. And it was a difficult process, right? So I
Yes.
never looked at the violin as that's his ticket to college.
Mhm.
Never, ever. I only saw the violin as his way of building his character. Going back to when they're young, you want to study them. You want to go with their interest. You want to be able to give them something where not only will they learn their skill, but
Mhm.
they're going to have difficulties. So son number 2 had difficulties with the violin. Son number 1 had difficulties with baseball, right? He loved baseball, but he ultimately ran into a wall in middle school because he grew fast and he stopped. Actually, all sports, right? Your height, your build really matters.
True.
And so he was a starter, doing great when he was young. And then he hit middle school and his body stopped growing and everybody else grew. And you've got a lot of different body builds. Some kids grow really fast. Some kids really grew really, slow. So he went from starter to sitting on the bench. And I tell you, Vanessa, that was the best thing that could ever have happened to him, because
Yeah.
through that
Uh-huh.
he could empathize with being a starter and be a bench warmer. He was a great cheerleader for those on his team. Eventually, he became a starter again in high school. But prior to that, he was on the bench, and it was a difficult period because he couldn't get over this hump of performance until his
Mhm.
body grew,
Yeah.
right? But that made him really love baseball, not because he was just performing well, because he loved the game. I mean, he would say things like, I go on the field and the smell of grass makes me happy. Right? Okay, so
Yes.
that
Yeah,
this
there's a
kid's a
passion there.
there's a passion there, right? But again, if you had met us playing baseball in elementary school, I wouldn't say he had any kind of real talent. That talent, performance grew because he persisted and he put the time into building habits and going out there. So
Yeah.
that's what I would say to parents, young parents, is that, you know, look for their skills and their love. When it gets tough, come alongside of them. Don't let them quit, because you're building more things than just skill and talent. And 3, I would say, what are your values? What is your character and values? So for our family, it wasn't about accolades. Accolades were just a byproduct of building values, of empathy, of my center of calling, of why am I doing what I'm doing, of a
Mhm.
greater cause than themselves,
Yes.
and then be able to also help along the way. So I said, you're here today, not because you deserve it. You don't. You are privileged. You have people behind you.
Mhm.
You have 2 parents that have gone through the system. You have 2 grandfathers that lived the American dream and studied and had difficulty. You are riding on the backs of those that helped you along the
Yes.
way, not just
Mhm.
your family, but everybody in your community. So remember that when you are, looking at your accolade, it's not just about you. That's a value. So we do the exact same thing to our youngest. My oldest and my youngest, there's a 12-year gap between the
Mhm. Yes.
two. And so, he's already my oldest is out of college, worked in his first company, and now he's at a startup.
Yeah.
And so when he talks to my son, who's now beginning that high school process real soon, right?
Yes.
He's giving him direction and latitude and perspective that's beyond just college. But I always try not to give him pressure, because there is enormous pressure. People, when he was really
Yes.
young, said, your 2 brothers went to Harvard. Are you going to go? And I would go, please don't ask him that question, because he's his own person. You go to Harvard doesn't mean you're going to be successful in life, right? It's who you are and
Yeah.
what you do with what you have. So that's my long parenting piece that I shared with you. I'd be
Yes.
happy to talk about college admissions as well.
I wanted to add a few things to what you said because you made such good points. It's really not about the numbers. And that's the purpose of my whole podcast, is because of all the technical skills that you learn in school is not enough to make you successful in life. And that's what I'm adding all these topics around soft skills, life skills that you need to learn. And you bring really, really good perspectives on values. Also, living your life based on who you are as an individual and not what society forces upon you. You could be really strong based on what the hopes that your parents have for you and maybe what the community says for you to do. But you might be even stronger if you pursue your dream in something you feel passionate about because you want to do it even more, just like your second son who wants to do violin. Yes, it's hard, but because it's something you want to do and you enjoy, you kind of reach higher heights, so to speak, right? So I love, love, love that. But yes, let's pivot a little bit towards the college piece. I wanted to get an understanding as I am trying to learn. And you mentioned a little bit earlier that seventh grade might be too early to reach out to you. In general, what is your recommendation on when parents or family should come to you?
So if you are coming to me like eighth or ninth grade, that is a good entry point because you need to plan in advance,
Mm-hmm.
right? So all the accolades begin in terms of record ninth grade or after eighth grade. So if
Okay.
you received an accolade in eighth grade, like a reading and writing award, let's say a national award, you don't put that on your college application. The clock starts in ninth grade in terms of recording. This is what I want to talk about. In terms of
Okay.
recording your information on the college application. However, it does make a difference because remember I said you're building
Yes.
skills,
Yes.
you're building motivation, you're building a pathway of increasing intellectual curiosity. So they definitely matter. Now, do you have to have all these, tournaments, trophies, and things like that? No. However, if your child is really motivated by these, what I call trinkets of accolades prior to high school, then use that to motivate them. If it's more for you because you want to live out your unrealized dream, obviously that is not very healthy,
No,
right?
it's not.
But
Agree.
I think that you need to definitely plan their interests if you can. Some parents don't have the time to do that, right? Some parents are really good at providing the inroads to get there. So they're figuring out all the swim competitions, all the spelling bee competitions, all these things prior to high school to get their kid to keep being motivated and grow in that way.
Yeah.
So I think that it depends on the family, but if you can start building a resume early on ninth grade, that is fantastic because you do need extracurricular activities. You need to show your interest.
And I know for college admission, there's different pillars or columns, so to speak, that you have to look at because they want almost the perfect student, right? You have to have a certain GPA. You have to write an amazing, compelling essay. You need to really nail your interview, show your verbal communication skills, right? And also
Yeah.
volunteering, extracurricular activities, and the list just goes on and on. Now, if you were talking to a parent who is, maybe their child is entering high school or somewhere in middle high school, junior, and they have some time, a few years left until they enter college. What do you think bears the most weight if the parent says, I don't have that much time, I work full time, and I can only commit 2 hours a week to drive my kids somewhere? Like, what kind of focus do you think they should really spend their time on?
Great question, Vanessa. It depends on when they come to me. So I always liken it to making dinner. The more time you have to make a phenomenal dinner, the better your dinner could be.
Yeah,
So
I
if
love
you
that.
come to me when you're a junior, and you come to me even maybe after your junior year, there's only so much I can help you do. I can help you shape your narrative, your story, but I can't give you tips and advice on how to take that current interest and elevate it to the next level, or
Mhm.
how to motivate and look at different kinds of interests. Let's say if they were into artificial intelligence, right? If they were into data science. If you came to me early and said, I think in the child, I would talk to the child more than the parent there at that point, says, I'm interested in these things. Then I have more time to say, take a look at this, take a look at that. Here's what you can do with here and build what I call proof points. There are some differences,
Of
right?
course.
So the first entry point is like, when are you coming? Any kind of college admissions counselor, when are you coming to talk to me? Do we have 3 years to make that happen and give you some ideas? Do we have like 6 months or 3 months?
Yeah.
Right. But the earlier you come, the easier it is for me to help your child and advise your child in building their narrative. So, what do I mean by building their narrative? I'm talking about identity. What are some things that you're interested in? Your extracurriculars are proof points of your identity, what you're interested in. Colleges all love depth rather than breadth. You can only fit in so many slots on your Common App. But to me, it's about what are you really going deep into? So if you are really into music, then tell me where you are now and where can you go to create depth. Like someone came to me and said, I want to know if can get into Harvard. Let's look at your profile, right? And so I
Yeah.
was trying to create depth and it came down to instrument. And I said, how long are you practicing right now?
Yeah.
And I said, I just need you to be honest. He said, well, maybe 30, 40 minutes a day. And so that answered it already for me. In order to get to that kind of depth, you have to put hours.
Yes.
She's competing with kids that are pre-Juilliard, pre-Coburn that go all day Saturday and 4 hours or 3 hours on a Tuesday. So you're competing with kids that have done national competition, international competition, right? That's the depth that they have versus even just being in a youth orchestra. There's differences of depth. The key to creating these great narratives is to say, where is your depth? You know, have you sustained your interest for a long time? And whether you're going to, community college or the best schools, the more depth you show and prove, the better it shows that this is something that is truly about who you are.
Interesting.
Right?
So really depth
even
first. Yeah. Okay.
Depth. So it's not about, so a lot of students come to me and go, Mrs. Lee, what should I do next? Or they'll hear, the families would go, I just heard from my friend that she or she should do this and it's going to get them to that school. And I go, you're going to hear a lot of that. It doesn't matter what the what is, it is the why. So what is your story and how do we take your child's interest in whatever that might be? So if they're an entrepreneur, right?
Yes.
Where do they start? They usually start pretty young, like 5th grade. Where do they start? They created an online business. Great. What's the numbers? What's the revenue stream look like? How do I know they've been working on this for years? Because the revenue, the numbers really say a lot.
Yeah.
I want to be a YouTube star. Great. How long did you start this? Can I start tomorrow? Well, I guess you could, but do you have the skill sets? Can you film? Can you do audio? Can you edit? How long is that going to take you? What's your topic? You see, I'm saying you got to create depth. The earlier you start that process, the more proof points you have.
Yes.
And that's one of the biggest things of college admissions is having a cohesive story, not fashioning or packaging your story.
Yeah. Not what they want to hear, right?
Not what they want to hear.
Yes.
It's more about who you are,
Yes.
right? This is the common sense part. You go to your party and who are you attracted to? The people that are funny, but have depth, like they know something deep.
Yes.
Right? Okay. And they have their eyes kind of twinkle a little bit and they have this exuberance and joy when they talk about whatever it might be, whether it's learning disabilities, whether it's playing the violin, whether it's being a soccer player, whether it's a business that they have, whether it's like cancer research they're into, all the what, there's so many out there, but it's the depth and joy that needs to come out that attracts people to that. So that's what's really key, especially when it's test optional. When the test optional piece came into, that was a watershed moment. My families go, what should we do? And I give them all the stats, right? Because there's so many students applying. There's not many students, so many students applying to more schools. So what used to be maybe like 5, 7, 12 schools, now they're applying to 20 because there's so much uncertainty with test optional,
Yes. Okay, that makes a lot of
right?
sense. Uh-huh.
A lot of them this year couldn't take the test, especially in California. You have COVID, the fires, yeah, you name it, we had it, right?
Seriously, we had everything.
Seriously, right? We had everything. But going
Yeah.
back to the one thing that stays constant is your extracurricular activities. Your interests really dictate who you are, and they are really important. So I always go, what do you love to do? Like, do not think too much at this point of like everybody else.
Yeah.
What do you have that's your strength, you're motivated by, and you want to excel in? And the earlier your child kind of knows, right, of
Hmm.
what that is. And granted, if you are focused on the process, you can switch it up. You can go from speech and debate to mock trial and moot court, right? It
Yes.
depends on like what the skill sets are, right? You could even do speeches. It's whatever your child feels like they love and they excel in. Does that
Yes.
make sense? And so that goes back to what's happening with the college admissions trend. You still need a solid application. You need to have great, compelling essays. You need to have amazing depth with your extracurriculars. And of course, you're going to need your grades. And here's the thing with grades, the average grade these days in high school is, I think it's like an A minus,
Yeah.
right?
Very competitive environment
It's
out there.
very competitive. And so we talk a lot about grade inflation as well. Is there grade inflation? Maybe not, maybe so. Universities and colleges want you to be in the most rigorous curriculum, and they want to see that you're building this rigor. So maybe you start off with no APs, but you have the regular classes freshman year. Maybe if you're one of the lucky ones, you get to take, or not, I don't know, depending on the perspective, one AP, and then you build up to 3 or 4 APs junior year, and then maybe you build up to 5 APs senior year. Now, that is a lot considering when I went to school, I took no AP because they didn't even have APs,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It's different
So
now.
it's different. The pressure's there, but going back to those habits, right? Knowing your child, can your child survive on, how many hours of sleep do they need? That's the first question I ask. How many hours of sleep do you need really to
Yes.
function? Because if you're going to burn out or if you're going to have an ulcer in high school, is that really worth all of
No.
this? And no, I
Such a
don't think
good point.
so.
Such a good
A-
point.
And I tell the parents, look, you're parenting not to 18, you're parenting for a lifetime. You want to have a relationship with that child. So is that the route to go? Now, some kids, they can do it, they can juggle it, right? My oldest, I mean, even today I'll go, do you really need to do that? Can you just calm down? I mean, he's such a go-goer.
Yeah.
That's who he is.
Yeah.
And so you got to know your child and go, is that something worthwhile? And if so, do you have the skill sets that you developed when they were young that will kind of get them there? Right. And then
Hmm.
figure out what do you need to do, where their love and interest. So the same things, the interest, the compelling story, their academics is sort of like the most important thing, their rigor, their grades, and even SAT, ACT, it depends now. It really
Yes.
does.
Yes.
Some schools that have been doing test option for a long time, 50% of their kids are getting admitted without test scores,
Yeah.
right? So you will hear crazy things, and it's happening. I mean, in the LA Times today, it came out, there's an article about how many kids are just devastated.
Yes,
Uh,
I've heard. I've talked to friends. Some of the
they,
stories have not been so great.
no, they haven't, right? And I totally feel for those students because they work so hard to get there. And so I'm trying to prevent that from happening by saying, don't pick that one or two dream school, pick 9 of them. you
Yes.
know,
You'd have a
right? Pick
backup.
9 of them. And then also know, and I keep saying this a lot, I know that pressure is very real. That school is not going to define you.
Oh my God,
You
good point. So
right?
true.
You're not defined by that school. It's really who you are, and you have to understand that there are things out of your control that won't may not allow you to go to that school.
Yes.
One of the examples I use is if your school has institutional needs and they happen to have a flourishing orchestra, and senior year for that college, you're going to lose 4 oboe players, let's say, because they're
Hmm.
seniors. Well, who do you think they're going to look for? Not a violinist, but an oboe player, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
sorry if you've been a violinist all your life, there might not be a spot for you. So you might not be one that they would pick because you're not an oboe player. Does that make you nothing? Absolutely not. It's
Hmm.
just that that institution may not need that, right? So
Yeah.
when all the institutions say, because of Black Lives Matter, because of what's happening in our country, and it's test optional, they're going to increase the number of underrepresented minority,
Hmm.
particularly African Americans. That's where our country's at. That's what we need to do. We need to make a statement. That's what happened to a lot of schools, the UCs, the Ivies. They took more African American students. They took more Pell Grant students, and they should, quite honestly,
Yeah.
because that's where our country needs, we need to level the playing field. So it's not because I haven't worked hard. No one's questioning that. It's hard because we think that's the game. We think that it's a
Yes.
meritocracy system, but I'm going to give you a myth. It's not.
What I wanted to add is to help teenagers who might go through this listening to us. One point I've learned in life is really to focus on what you can control. A lot of things happen to you. So many things, like you said, you've been maybe studying for your SAT score and just wanted to make sure you score as high as possible. And all of a sudden, it's your time and they don't require that anymore. What do you do? The mindset I want to instill in the youth today is really think about and focus on what you can control, not what's out of your control. This will not just help you get into college, but your first job, and to continually succeed in your career and life. That's just everything. Your mindset, we talked about this a little bit earlier, right? Really having the right mindset, because that way you'll learn to be happy but successful at the same time. And I think that's so much more important, to learn a lot of those soft skills, your mind and growth and development, all these areas. And you make so many good points throughout this whole conversation we had, Gina. So I really love the way you think about things.
Well, I think you hit it on the nail. You know, it is absolutely what can you control. And even on my college application, I go, think of it as a canvas, an art canvas. What can you control? You control the narrative. You absolutely control the narrative. So your grades are one narrative, your extracurricular is another narrative, but that essay is your voice. You have to make that voice loud and clear. If you muddy it, if you become too general, I don't know who you are. So,
Hmm.
what's your story? What do you care about? What do you love? Who do you want to be? What have you learned? That's your narrative. And that narrative has to be singularly clear, crystal clear. If they don't get that after reading your essay in 3 minutes, then you have not done your job carefully. You haven't spent time really thinking about your narrative.
Hmm.
So when I say narrative, it's like, it's your story. What's
Yes.
Vanessa's story?
Yeah.
What's Gina's story? And then I go, is it worth reading? Right?
Yes, yes.
So
You capture the
sometimes
attention.
is it worth reading?
Yeah.
Right? So please don't write about that story about your sports thing one more time, because guess what? There's 5 million stories like that. And that doesn't tell me your voice. That doesn't
Yes.
tell me who you are. So you have to remember, who am I talking to? They're reading thousands of applications, right? You
Yeah.
can't be inauthentic. I mean, yes, you could, but then that crosses the line of your values. They're looking for valued, kind, compassionate people that won't step over everybody else to get their way. They are. I mean, college admissions people will say, we just want to see kids that are kind and compassionate, would make great roommates, but have their story. They're looking for those people. So if your narrative is muddled, then it doesn't surprise me when you don't get in,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Because
Yes.
that's the part you can control. There are
Yes.
institutional needs you can't control. But going back to, like you said, things that you can control really show your adaptability, right?
Yes.
Because you
Yes.
hit a wall in life, doesn't go the way you want. So are you going to like be totally burned by that and sit in that rut for a long time? Or do you go, okay, that didn't work out. Why didn't it work out? What do I need to pivot and shift and go a different direction? And
Yes.
that's what I would say is college admissions really. It's about understanding the trends, knowing what still is true today, and shifting and pivoting, and not being so drawn and down because you didn't get what you thought you should get.
Yes.
Right. So again, it's what I thought I should get. It's almost it's connected to entitlement. So I
Mm-hmm.
always ask my students to check their entitlement at the door if you want better success, and then be able to be adaptable, right? That's really important, to be
Yes, so
adaptable.
true.
You can do so many things. You don't have to be the, I don't know, what is a doctor, lawyer, engineer that every Asian American parent
Yeah.
want. And I admit it, even with all the stuff, I go to my sons, can't one of you guys be a doctor? Because, in our family, we have too many lawyers in business. I just need one doctor but it's
That's
about me, right? And they like, look at me like, no, mom, sorry,
no.
you didn't raise us the right way. Then I go, I know. As it's a joke. As Asian parents, we probably want some doctor in the family to
Yes,
help
I
us
hear
out.
you.
Yeah, but to be adaptable is really key. And you can do that in college admissions still. So you control what you can control. You wait for the results, and hopefully you'll get one or two. But if you have this fixed mindset, if I do not get into X, Y, and Z schools, I'm
Mm-hmm.
nothing. That is a place you don't want to go there because it's unrealistic and it's unhealthy.
Yes, so I agree with you. And I know you gave us a lot of great information today. So if our listeners want to learn a little bit more, is there a particular website of yours that they could look into or social media they could follow you on?
Sure. Thank you so much, Vanessa. Yeah, they can look at Gina, Gina B Lee. So GinaBlee.com. There's a form where you fill out that will come to me, and we will connect via email. That's probably the best way. You'll know a
Okay.
lot more about me and the way I look at college admissions.
No, this was really great. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks so much, Vanessa, for having me on. I really enjoyed our conversation as well.
Hope you enjoyed and learned a lot from our interview with Gina Lee. Now, what was most memorable to me is that we need to work on developing a depth around our passion and prepare to tell a story that makes us one of a kind. And if you want to find more about Gina, you can visit her website at www.ginablee, so it's Gina, B as in boy, Lee.com. And of course, you can find more about us at www.firstmentorstreet.com. And remember, first is spelled 1ST. Thanks so much for listening and have a great day.